The census numbers in Numbers 1 to 2 and 26 are among the most controversial passages concerning the Exodus. There are at least 9 interpretations of the censuses, and it is pretty much impossible to say which one for sure is the correct one. However, what we're going to do today on this Mr. EC show is discover the possibilities on this episode of Ancient Egypt and the Bible. This segment is called the Mr. EC Show. For those of you who have never seen a Mr. EC show, this is where we take a controversy, where there are theories, and in the briefest possible way, list and describe each possibility. We do not explore every possible view or every variation of each view. We only provide a skeleton outline of each. And just for fun, I give you my biased and totally subjective opinion of which possibilities are the most likely using a sock rating. Now, in the past, we've done a dirty sock rating, which is the more dirty socks, the less likely a hypothesis. However, in this video, we are going to do a clean sock rating. The more clean socks, the more likely a high possibility. So, 1 clean sock, very unlikely. 10 clean socks, most likely. So it's a scale from 1 to 10. So, we hope you enjoy this little segment. Again, it's just to familiarize yourself with the various views and have a little fun doing so. Okay, so for those of you who are not familiar with this, is that there is a census in Numbers chapter 1 to 2 and another census that's recorded in Numbers 26. This records the so-called number of Israelites that came out of Egypt and then went into the Promised Land. And it's a controversial passage because the numbers can be seen as being very, very large, which speaks to, say, archaeological demographics and issues of how do you coordinate the movement of that many people in the wilderness. So scholars have proposed various different readings for this passage. So then, let's start with the various views. And the first view we're going to start with is the literal reading. This was the most popular view of the census numbers until the 1960s. It takes the numbers that are found in the passages and reads them as literal numeric representations. It also reads the census in terms of fighting men. This reading comes to the interpretation that there were 600,000 males capable of fighting, then extrapolates that there must have been another 400,000 men who are too old or too young to fight, and then another million women, leading to estimates that the Israelite exodus would have been between 2 to 3 million people. Now, the problem with this is this was about half of the entire population of Egypt. So, this is going to be a problem for, say, archaeological demographics. If there was that many people there, why did they just leave? Why didn't they just take over? But there's also logistical views involved with coordinating the movement of 2 million people. Moreover, what we find from the archaeology of, say, the towns of the Nile Delta, which is where the Semitic Asiatics inhabit, suggests that there weren't that many people, not even close, probably closer to less than 100,000 people. So that in the span of just a few decades, this view went from the majority position to more or less a fringe view among scholars. And today, it's a view that's held to by only a tiny minority of fundamentalists. And frankly, even most fundamentalists have abandoned this view. Guys like, Petrovich and Brian Wood won't even hold to this view anymore. So that sort of says how unpopular it's gotten. So with that said, the literal view of the census numbers gets 2 clean socks. The second interpretation of the census numbers is the Exodus never happened and the census was fiction. This view is very popular among skeptics. However, it also doubles down upon the literal reading discussed in the previous view. This view has to maintain that the only legitimate reading of the census texts is a literal reading. And because an exodus of 2 million people isn't possible, therefore neither is a literal exodus. Add to that the fact that there's no evidence of 2 million people wandering the Sinai. And if they are correct about this being the only reading for the census passages, they might have a point. However, to arrive at this reading as an exclusive interpretation, you kind of have to read the text like a fundamentalist. So with that said, this view gets 3 clean socks. The next interpretation is what's called the post-Exodus count. Now, this is one of the earliest proposed alternative readings to the census numbers. And it was based upon a documentary hypothesis reading of the text. The idea is that the Pentateuch is of late authorship. So the numbers of the census was really the census numbers that were taken by David or Solomon. And these numbers are redacted back into the text. The sufficiency of the documentary hypothesis aside, there is no evidence that these censuses had anything to do with the censuses taken during the monarchy period. It's essentially empty conjecture. So this view receives 1 clean sock. The next view of the census numbers that we will discuss is called idealized numbers. This view states that numbers in the census were idealized. Each tabulation represents a certain mystical or ideal set of numbers for each tribe. The view states that the counts for each tribe follows a certain algorithmic or numeric pattern. Now, the problem with this view is that it has to present an arbitrary pattern that seems to have little or no precedence in the literature. For example, every number is divisible by 5 or 7. Well, that pattern may be true, but that doesn't tell us what the pattern means or why the pattern is important. Similar arguments have been used for the ages of the patriarchs in Genesis 5 and 7. And it is important to note that none of these idealized patterns of numbers repeat. That is, a pattern found in one passage does not seem to repeat in another passage. This raises serious questions as to whether the idea has sufficient warrant. So with that said, this view gets 4 clean socks. The fifth interpretation we will talk about now is genre inflation. The idea here is that the census accounts are part of the war chronicle genre. With war chronicles, numbers of soldiers and combatants are inflated. This view was supported by Michael Heiser. For example, the numbers of Persians that Alexander the Great fought were inflated into the millions. Another example is the 101,128 slaves that were captured by Amenhotep II in his campaign from year 9. We don't know why this was done in War Chronicle genre, but it is a universally recognized feature of this genre. This view receives 6 clean socks. The sixth interpretation we'll be talking about here is armies and squads. Now, the next 4 views are going to look at the semantic range of the word elef, or thousands, and the extended meaning of hundreds and tens. And if you were to look at elef in, say, a modern lexicon like halot, you see a wide semantic range for the meaning of the word elef. This has given rise to many different interpretations just coming out of the meaning of that one word for the census numbers. And these views deal with the fact that the Semitic exodus was less than 100,000 people and tries to engage the semantic range of the text. Now, one of the meanings for elef is that of an army, with the hundreds and tens then being squads. The problem with this is that the Israelites would have probably not organized themselves in military formations. And some might even find the martial interpretation of this text to be unsavory. This view receives 7 clean socks. The 7th view we'll discuss is the camps interpretation. In this view, elef is a reference to camps that are not strictly military units. It's not a bad view, but it doesn't account for the remainder, the hundreds and the tens. So it really just looks at the thousands. And I think when compared to other views have better explanatory power. So with that said, this view receives 6 clean socks. The 8th interpretation that we'll discuss regarding the census numbers is the hero view. This is a view that is proposed by Titus Kennedy, and it's actually a bit of a hybrid with view number 6. He thinks that elef means heroes, but the remainder refers to squads of soldiers. His view actively engages the relatively small numbers involved. And to his credit, this view has good explanatory power. But like the armies and squads view, takes on a martial significance to the text. This view receives 7 clean socks. Okay, the 9th and final view we will look at is the clans and clades view. This view takes the definition of elef, that means clans, but that the remainder refers to clades. Now, a clade is a line of families that is not directly attached to a clan, but is associated with a clan. This view has the advantage of explaining why there are 2 censuses, one at the beginning of the wandering period and one just before the conquest. And one of the interesting things about this is if it's talking about clans, it's talking basically revealing that the number of clans essentially is unchanged. The idea is that even though the entire population of that generation, the generation that came out of Egypt, died in the wilderness, clan integrity was maintained throughout the 40-ish years of the wandering. The purpose then of the 2 groups of census figures was to demonstrate that despite the hardships of the wilderness that resulted in the entire generation dying out, God kept the integrity of the clans intact, which was an important imperative for ancient Israelites. This also fits in very, very neatly with the Israelite obsession with clan identity. And if you do any reading at all of the Old Testament, you see talk about clans just throughout the entire book. So it seems to fit into the identity of the Israelites that they have culturally, but also at the same time sort of avoiding the more martial connotations of some of the other interpretations that we've discussed here. So I think that this is the strongest of the views overall. It also has the greatest explanatory power. So the Clan and Clades view gets 9 clean socks. So anyway, that covers 9 different interpretations of the censuses of Numbers, chapters 1 to 2 and 26. We hope you found this interesting and you enjoyed this Mr. EC show. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible.